She waited 2.5 hours at the bar of one of Vancouver's most expensive hotels, wearing a dress she couldn't afford for a man who had already left the country. The champagne flute in front of Ren, no, not Ren, that name was taken, in front of Sloane Mercer had been refilled twice by a bartender who had stopped making eye contact with her around the 90-minute mark. The Fairmont Pacific Rim's lobby bar hummed with the quiet, moneyed energy of a Friday night. Tech executives closing deals over 18-year scotch, couples dressed for theater, the occasional NHL player moving through the crowd like a slow-moving weather system that made everyone turn and pretend not to look. Sloane looked at none of it. She was 31 years old, a forensic bookkeeper for a mid-size accounting firm in Yaletown, and she had spent $412 on a burgundy wrap dress that the woman at the boutique on Robson had called architectural. It hugged the generous slope of her hips and the full, unapologetic curve of her waist in a way that made Sloane stand differently in it, straighter, like she was daring the room to say something. She had bought shapewear she didn't need and skipped lunch because she'd been too nervous to eat. And she had arrived 7 minutes early because punctuality was the only form of confidence she could always guarantee. The man she was waiting for was named Derek Phelan. They had matched on a dating app 6 weeks ago. He was handsome in photographs, dark-haired, square-jawed, the kind of man who looked like he'd been to private school and had complicated feelings about it. He described himself as a venture capitalist. He'd made her laugh over text in ways that felt effortless. And when he'd suggested the Fairmont, she'd felt the small, precarious flutter of something she'd stopped letting herself feel after her last relationship ended in a parking lot argument about her emotional unavailability. He had texted her at 5:43 that afternoon. "Can't wait. You're going to love this place." It was now 9:17. She'd sent 3 messages. Read receipts, all of them. "Can I get you anything else?" The bartender, young, kind-faced, clearly uncertain how to navigate this, set a small dish of mixed nuts beside her glass. "No." Sloane paused. "Actually, yes. The bill, please. Just for the drinks." She pulled out her phone one last time. Nothing. She blocked his number with the particular efficiency of a woman who had learned not to linger over decisions that had already made themselves, tucked the phone into her clutch, and reached for her coat on the back of the stool. She was mid-shrug, one arm in the sleeve, when the lobby bar went quiet. Not the natural ebb of conversation, something else. The pianist in the corner stopped. The bartender, who had been pouring a gin and tonic, set the bottle down on the counter with the deliberateness of a man who had suddenly remembered he needed to be somewhere else. The couple 2 stools down gathered their things without speaking, without looking behind them, and walked quickly toward the elevator bank. Sloane turned. 4 men had come through the lobby entrance. They were dressed well, excellently actually, the kind of clothing that didn't advertise its price. But they moved through the space the way water moves around stone, adjusting the room to themselves rather than the other way around. They weren't looking at the art or the bar menu. Their eyes moved in slow, practiced sweeps across every exit, every face, every corner. Behind them walked a 5th man. He was tall, not dramatically so, but enough that he occupied more vertical space than seemed fair. His hair was dark and cut close, silver at the temples in a way that looked less like aging and more like a deliberate choice. His face was, there was no word for it except severe, the kind of bone structure that would have looked cruel on anyone with less composure. He wore a charcoal suit over a black shirt, no tie, and the absence of the tie was somehow the most alarming thing about him, as though formality itself had decided not to bother. His name was Ivar Crestwood. Sloane did not know this yet, but she would, and the knowing would rewrite the last 6 weeks of her life in under 5 minutes. Anyone in Vancouver who moved money, legally or otherwise, knew the name Crestwood the way you knew the name of a weather system, by reputation before it arrived. Ivar Crestwood ran the Crestwood Group, which was, on paper, a private equity firm headquartered in a glass tower in Cole Harbor. Off paper, it was the financial spine of the Pacific Northwest's most sophisticated criminal infrastructure. Shipping, real estate, a network of shell corporations so elegantly constructed that 3 separate federal investigations had dissolved on contact with his lawyers. He was 42. He had never been charged with anything. He had not come to the Fairmont Pacific Rim for a drink. One of his men, a broad, scarred man Sloan would later learn was called Rafferty, stepped to the center of the lobby bar and spoke at a volume that carried without effort. "The bar is closed for a private function. Please collect your belongings and exit through the main lobby. Thank you for your cooperation." There was no argument. There never was, apparently, when Ivar Crestwood was in the room. The bar emptied in under 2 minutes. Couples, executives, the pianist gathering her sheet music with shaking hands. Everyone flowing toward the exits in that particular way of people who understand instinctively that a situation has moved beyond their jurisdiction. Sloan did not move. This was not bravery. She was genuinely paralyzed, her coat half on, one hand gripping the bar's edge, watching the room drain around her like water down a sink. By the time she registered that she should go, the exits were already flanked by men in dark suits, and Rafferty was looking directly at her with the expression of someone encountering a variable that wasn't in the plan. And then Ivar Crestwood was walking toward her. He moved without urgency, which was somehow worse than if he'd moved quickly. He stopped at the bar, 2 feet away, and looked at her with grey eyes that were doing something that felt less like seeing and more like accounting, tallying, sorting, categorizing. He sat down on the stool beside her, not across from her, beside her, which meant he was looking at the same wall she was, which meant she had to turn her head to look at him, which put her at a slight physical disadvantage, which she suspected was not accidental. "You're the bookkeeper," he said. It wasn't a question. Sloan blinked. "I'm a forensic accountant." Derek Phelan told my associate he was meeting his bookkeeper tonight. Ivar's voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had learned it didn't need to compete for attention. He said she had documentation, routing information for 3 offshore accounts. He arranged this meeting as a handoff. The room tilted slightly. "Derek," Sloan said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, "told me he was a venture capitalist who liked Thai food and had a dog named after a hockey player." A pause. "What was the dog's name?" Ivar asked. "Gretzky." She heard how absurd it sounded as she said it. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth. Sloan would not have believed warmth on that face in that moment, but a recalibration. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and set a photograph on the bar. It was Derek, but not the Derek from the app. Unshaven, caught mid-movement, obviously photographed without his knowledge from a significant distance. "This is the man you were meeting. That's him." Sloan studied the photograph. Her chest was doing something complicated, though he looked better in his profile picture. They always do. Rafferty materialized at Ivar's shoulder. "Boss, she could be playing us." Crestwood kept his eyes on Sloan. "She's not." "You don't know that. I know what someone looks like when they've been waiting too long and the waiting has turned into something else." His gaze dropped, briefly, carefully, to the champagne flute, the untouched nuts, the coat she was still half wearing. She was stood up. The word landed in Sloane's sternum like something dropped from a height. "He didn't stand me up," she said. And then the reality of what she was actually saying, of what Derek Phelan had actually done, hit her at full velocity. "He used me. He set up a date at a hotel he knew you'd be watching, so your people would converge here and he'd have time to do whatever he's done and go wherever he's gone." She paused. "He told me to dress up. He told me to arrive early. He texted me at 5:43. The fury arrived like weather, fast, total, and clarifying. "Do you know," Sloan said, her voice taking on a quality that made Rafferty take a single step backward. How long it took me to find a dress in my size that doesn't look like I'm trying to apologize for existing. I drove to 3 different stores. 3. And I didn't eat today because I was nervous. And I've been sitting here for 2.5 hours being pitied by a bartender who was too polite to ask me to leave, and this person, used me as a decoy. She slammed her clutch onto the bar. The champagne flute wobbled. Ivar steadied it with 2 fingers without looking away from her. I don't have your routing numbers, Sloane said flatly. I don't have any documentation for anything. I have a maxed-out credit card and a dress I'm going to have to return on Monday, and if you're planning to hurt me over this, I'd honestly like to get it over with, because I am starving, and this has already been the worst Friday of my adult life. Ivar Crestwood stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly to Rafferty, "Get the car." Rafferty hesitated. And the woman? She comes. She's a civilian, boss. A dead end. We should. She comes. Sloane opened her mouth. I don't. Mr. Phelan made you a liability the moment he chose you for this. Ivar stood. He was closer than she'd realized, and the height of him was more considerable from this angle. He chose you specifically because he believed no one would look twice at you. Because he thought you were invisible. His voice was completely level. He was wrong on both counts. You are not invisible, and now people who are considerably less patient than I am know your face, and they will assume you know where the money is. Sloane stared at him. I can call the police, she said. You can. Are you going to tell me the police work for you? Some of them do, he said, but that's not why calling them won't help you tonight. Phelan's associates are not the kind of people who wait for investigations to conclude. He extended his hand, not grabbing, not demanding, just open, offered, waiting. You have until the car arrives to decide. She thought about her apartment in Mount Pleasant with the leaky kitchen tap she'd been meaning to have fixed for 4 months. She thought about her cat, a large, judgmental tabby named Earl, who ate twice a day and would not be happy if she didn't come home. She thought about the bartender, who was still somewhere in the back and who had been kind to her in the specific, careful way of someone watching a person have a very bad night. She took his hand. The car was a black SUV with tinted windows and the kind of suspension that made Vancouver's potholes feel like suggestions. They headed north over the bridge, rain moving across the glass in sheets, the city's lights smearing into watercolor. Ivar sat beside her. He didn't speak, but his silence was not hostile. It was the silence of a man who had decided something and did not feel the need to narrate it. One of his other men, a lean, watchful person named Thea, no, that name was taken too, she'd learn later, sat up front. They arrived at a building in West Vancouver that looked from the outside like a very expensive nothing. Glass and concrete, no signage, a private underground entrance sealed behind a gate that opened before the car fully stopped. The elevator required a keycard and a biometric scan, which Sloane noted with the particular attention of someone whose professional life was built around, noticing the things other people documented and hoped no one would find. The penthouse was enormous and almost entirely dark, except for the ambient light of the city and the harbor below. It smelled of cedar and something sharp she couldn't identify. Sit, Ivar said, gesturing to a gray sectional sofa that probably cost more than her car. Sloane sat. She set her clutch beside her and took off her coat and folded it precisely across her knees, because she needed to do something with her hands. What happens now? She asked. Ivar crossed to a cabinet and opened it. He poured something amber into a glass, carried it to her, and set it on the coffee table within reach but not pressed upon her. Now, he said, taking the chair opposite, we find Derek Phelan. And then I recover what he took from me. $400, Sloane said. He looked at her. That's what I'm out, she clarified. Dress, alterations, the Uber there. The champagne was going on his tab, theoretically. Add in the shapewear, and we're looking at closer to $450. The muscle in Ivar's jaw moved. It took her a moment to understand it was because he was suppressing something. $14 million, he said. That is what Phelan took from me. Sloane picked up the glass, smelled it. Good scotch, probably older than some of her colleagues' marriages, and took a sip. It settled in her chest like a small fire. How? He was the comptroller of 3 of my holding companies. He redirected a series of transfers over 14 months, small enough amounts that the automated flagging missed them, into a set of accounts I didn't control. He paused. He was good. He wasn't good enough, Sloane said. If you knew what he'd done, someone caught it. One of my analysts flagged an anomaly 2 days ago. In what? He looked at her with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to being questioned by someone he'd just rescued from a hotel bar. In a depreciation schedule, he said, after a moment. Sloane set her glass down. What kind of depreciation schedule? Does it matter? I'm a forensic accountant, she said. It's the only thing I do. What kind? A beat. Real estate holdings. A commercial development in Richmond. She turned this over, and the anomaly was an asset valued at $7.2 million in 2021 that had somehow depreciated to 1.4 by last quarter, with no corresponding documentation, straight line or accelerated. Ivar blinked. It was the first time she'd seen anything close to surprise on his face. Straight line, he said. Supposedly, over how many years? The schedule claimed 30, which is legally defensible for commercial property. Sloane said slowly, except that at straight line over 30 years, the annual depreciation should be just under $240,000, which means in 3 years you'd expect a reduction of roughly $700,000, not $5.8 million. She paused. Unless someone was running a parallel phantom depreciation schedule and pulling the delta. Silence. Rafferty, who had come in quietly and was standing near the hallway, looked at Ivar with an expression that meant something. That, Ivar said very carefully, is precisely what our analyst eventually determined after 4 days of forensic review. It's a clean play, Sloane admitted, with the detached professional appreciation of someone who genuinely loved the architecture of fraud, even when it was criminal. Most auditors would have caught the straight-line miscalculation, but missed the phantom schedule entirely if Phelan kept the support files in a separate system. She paused. Did he keep the support files in a separate system? Yes, and you don't have access to them. We believe he transferred them before he ran. Sloane was quiet for a moment, then. He sent me something. Both men looked at her, the afternoon of the date. He said he was sending me a restaurant menu, a special digital package the hotel gave VIP guests, something about curated experiences, pre-selected pairings. She was already reaching for her clutch. I thought it was odd. He'd never done anything like that before. He texted me 3 times asking if I'd opened it. She unlocked her phone, found the message thread. She had not yet deleted it, because she never deleted anything until she had fully processed her feelings about it, which sometimes took weeks, and found the attachment. It was a large file with a name that meant nothing. FPRC VIP pin Pycon oc.zip. Her phone had refused to open it. She held the screen up. Rafferty crossed the room in 4 steps. He looked at the file name and said something in a language Sloane didn't speak, which she understood anyway from his tone. Ivar stood. He came to her side of the coffee table, leaned down, braced his hands on his knees, and looked at the screen. This put his face very close to hers. He smelled. She noticed with the involuntary acuity of stress, of cedar and cold air, and something that was almost but not quite vanilla. He couldn't email the files directly, Ivar said, his voice low. My people were monitoring his accounts. He couldn't carry a physical drive without risking a search. So he compressed 14 months of financial documentation into a file and asked a woman he'd been manufacturing trust with for 6 weeks to carry it to a meeting she didn't know she was having. He used me as a courier, Sloane said. Yes, for $14 million worth of fraudulent accounting support files. Yes. She looked at her phone. Then she looked at Ivar Crestwood, the most dangerous man in the lower mainland, crouched beside her with his elegant jaw and his careful grey eyes, and the absolute stillness of someone who had learned that patience was the sharpest weapon available. "You need a forensic accountant," Sloane said. A pause. "To retrieve and interpret the files," she continued, "assuming we can extract them without triggering whatever wipe protocol Phelan probably built in as a failsafe. And then to reconstruct the transaction trail well enough to do whatever you're going to do with it." She paused again. "I assume this is not going to a tax court." "No," Ivar said. "Right." She picked up the scotch. "Okay, I'll help you. Because he used me, and because I am very, very good at this, and he thought I was too stupid and too invisible to matter, and I would like him to understand. At some point before whatever happens to him, that he was wrong about both." Ivar looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened and turned to Rafferty. "Get the technical team." It took Sloane 40 minutes to talk Ivar's technical team through the extraction without triggering the failsafe, which was buried in the metadata and would have wiped the file on the third failed decryption attempt. They'd been on their second try when she'd caught it. The team, 2 young men who clearly did not expect the woman in the burgundy dress to understand their work better than they did, had looked at her, and then looked at Ivar, and then done exactly what she said. The files were all there. 14 months of phantom schedules, falsified support documentation, transfer authorizations bearing Ivar's digital signature, forged. A clean, thorough piece of financial crime that would have taken a good forensic team months to untangle. Sloane untangled the core of it in under 3 hours, cross-referencing transaction IDs on a laptop. Rafferty brought her without being asked, her heels abandoned on the floor beside the sofa, her second glass of scotch going warm and forgotten on the coffee table. At 1:40 in the morning, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She looked at Ivar, who was standing near the windows watching the rain-blurred harbor. He gave her a single nod. She answered on speaker. "Sloane." Derek's voice was thin and too careful, the voice of a man who had prepared what he was going to say but was already losing confidence in the script. "Sloane, thank God. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was very even. "Where are you?" "I can't say. Listen, I'm so sorry about tonight. There was an emergency. Some very bad people are looking for me, Sloane, and I need your help. That file I sent you, the menu package, I need you to bring your phone to me. Tonight. I thought it was a restaurant menu. It's more than that. Please, I don't have time to explain. I need the phone. You couldn't have just kept it yourself?" A pause. His voice tightened. "I needed it off my devices. I needed someone. I needed a carrier. Someone they wouldn't look at." A beat, and then the careful friendliness dropped out entirely, like a stage set being struck. "Listen to me. I'm at the La Pointe Marine Terminal on Commissioner Street, east end of the lot. Get in a cab right now. Don't tell anyone. Just bring the phone. Do you understand me?" "I'm not sure," Sloane said. "You've been stringing me along for 6 weeks. You used me as an unwitting courier for stolen financial documentation. You left me sitting at the Fairmont for 2.5 hours while you ran, and now you're telling me to come to a cargo terminal at 1:40 in the morning. I'm trying to think of a version of this that makes sense for me, and I'm not finding it." Derek's voice went cold and ugly in a way that, Sloane thought later, told you everything about who he'd always been under the performances. "You're not as clever as you think you are," he said. "You're a bookkeeper in a wrap dress who spent her Friday night being stood up. You were a prop, Sloane. A prop I needed for 4 hours. Now bring me the phone or I will make the next 4 hours considerably worse for you than the last 4 were. Am I clear?" The line went quiet. Ivar had crossed the room without sound. He looked at Sloane's face, not with the clinical assessment from earlier, but something more direct, more present, and reached down, ending the call with one press of his thumb. "Rafferty," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "Already loading," Rafferty said from the hallway. Ivar looked at Sloane. She was not crying. She was doing the opposite of crying, the specific flatness of someone who has moved all the way through hurt and out the other side into something colder and more precise. "He was never real," she said. Not to Ivar exactly, to the room. "No, 6 weeks of texts." He asked about my mother. He remembered that I don't like cilantro. He did the work. "People like Felon are thorough," Ivar said. "It's why they're dangerous. And it's why they underestimate the people they choose to use. Because they do the research and they still only see what they're looking for." She looked at him. "He chose me because he thought I was the kind of woman no one would notice," she said. "Yes, and you walked into a bar full of people and noticed me immediately." A pause. Something shifted in the grey eyes. "Yes," Ivar said. The La Pointe Marine Terminal at 2 in the morning was fog and diesel and the deep industrial sound of the harbour. Container cranes standing still in the dark like enormous sleeping animals, the smell of salt water and iron. Sloane walked across the wet pavement in her burgundy dress, with Ivar's cashmere coat over her shoulders, which was warm in a way that felt like a statement, and her heels clicking against the concrete with the authority of a woman who had decided she was done being quiet. Derek was waiting beside a rusted cargo container, hunched into a jacket that wasn't warm enough, looking like a man whose plan had been failing for longer than he'd admitted to himself. He had a phone in one hand. The other hand held a compact pistol that shook slightly, which told Sloane everything she needed to know about how frightened he was. "Sloane." He straightened. "Where's the phone?" She stopped 10 feet away. She looked at him the way she looked at fraudulent balance sheets, with the total, lightless attention of someone cataloguing discrepancies. "You told me you had a rescue dog," she said. "You told me his name was Gretzky." "Sloane, was any of it real? Even one thing?" His expression moved through something that might have been almost guilt if he'd had time to let it settle. But he didn't, because behind Sloane the fog shifted and Ivar Crestwood stepped into the light. He had not hurried. He simply appeared, which was worse. Behind him, emerging from the shadows between the containers, Rafferty and 6 others materialized with the quiet, organized efficiency of people who had done this before and found it unremarkable. Derek's gun came up. Then it went down. Then he dropped it entirely, which Sloane felt was the most honest thing he'd done all evening. "Mr. Crestwood." Derek's voice had lost all its shape. "Boss, listen, I can explain. The Marchetti Group, they threatened my family. I didn't have a choice, Ivar stopped beside Sloane. He placed one hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was both possessive and careful. The way you'd handle something valuable, and looked at Derek Phelan with the particular expression of a man for whom this situation has become, at this point, primarily an administrative matter. "You stole from my organization," Ivar said. "You compromised 3 years of structured holdings. You involved a civilian who had no connection to my world, manufactured her trust, and used her as a carrier." He paused. "And then, when given the opportunity to behave with some residual dignity, you called her a prop." Derek looked at Sloane. There was something in his face. Not remorse, but the thing adjacent to it, the dawning comprehension of someone who has just understood the size of their miscalculation. Ivar turned slightly to look at Sloane. His hand was still at the small of her back, warm through the cashmere. "He was wrong about you," he said, quietly enough that it was only for her. "I want you to know that. He built an entire fiction around the assumption that you were someone the room would overlook. He was wrong, and you caught what my team missed. And he is standing in front of you right now because you were paying attention when no one thought you were." Sloane looked at Derek. The careful texts, the manufactured late-night calls, the 6 weeks of constructed intimacy designed to produce a useful, trusted, forgettable carrier, and felt the last of the hurt calcify into something much sturdier. "What happens to him now?" she asked. Ivar looked at her steadily. "That's up to you." She thought about the burgundy dress, and the 3 stores, and the lunch she hadn't eaten, and the bartender's careful pity, and 2.5 hours of waiting, and the moment she'd realized, tonight, in real time, that she had been so thoroughly and precisely used. "I'd like the money back," she said. "My $450. Ivar's expression didn't change, but something in it did. "Done. And I want his routing numbers for whatever he has left. Not for you, for the women I'm guessing he's done this to before, because men like this don't invent the method. They refine it." A pause. "Done," Ivar said again. She looked at Derek one more time. He had nothing left to offer the moment. He was just a frightened man in a jacket that wasn't warm enough, standing in the dark with the fog coming in off the water. "Rafferty," Ivar said. "Ready, boss. Take him." They drove back across the bridge in the same black SUV, the same rain against the tinted glass, the city's lights doing the same watercolor trick they'd done 2 hours ago. Sloane sat with Ivar's coat still around her shoulders. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. "I have a cat," she said eventually. "Earl. He needs to be fed at 7. My driver will take you home. I live in Mount Pleasant. I know." She looked at him. "I know a great deal about you," he said unapologetically. "I needed to determine whether you were what you appeared to be. And what did I appear to be? Someone entirely uninvolved." He paused. "Which you were, but you learned other things. You have 3 commendations from the RCMP for forensic support on fraud cases. You were offered a position with a federal task force in Ottawa, and turned it down because you didn't want to leave your mother, who lives in Burnaby. You are the best forensic accountant in this city, and you have been, by all available evidence, systematically passed over for advancement because your partners are short-sighted and your industry rewards the appearance of gravitas over its substance." Sloane looked at the rain on the window. "You looked me up in 3 hours," she said. 2. And you think that's normal?" "I think it was necessary." A pause. "And I think Phelan made a significant error in his research, because he looked at you and saw a tool. I looked at you and saw the only person in Vancouver who could have done what you did tonight in the time it needed to be done." The car slowed at the bridge approach. The city's lights were very bright through the wet glass. "I'm not interested in your world," Sloane said. "I want to be clear about that. I know. I'm a forensic accountant who follows evidence and then hands it to people with badges." "I know that too." "So, whatever this is, I'm not asking you for anything," Ivar said. "Tonight you were wronged by someone who thought you were disposable. You were not. I would like you to know that. Everything else is your decision." She looked at him, really looked, for the first time without fear moving her gaze around, and found a face that was complicated in ways she hadn't expected. Controlled, yes. Severe, yes. But watching her with an attention that was entirely uncomplicatedly honest. "Send me the depreciation files," she said, "the ones from Richmond, and whatever else Phelan built over 14 months. Why? Because whoever structured those phantom schedules built something clever, and I want to understand it properly. And because if I understand it, I can show you exactly how to make sure no one ever does it to you again." She paused. "That's what I do." Ivar looked at her for a long moment. "I'll have Rafferty send them tonight," he said. "Monday," she said. "Tonight I'm going to feed my cat, eat an entire bowl of pasta, and sleep for 11 hours. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. She suspected smiling was something he did rarely and in private, but it was the architecture of one, the shape beneath it. "Monday," he agreed. The car pulled up in front of her building. The rain had softened to something lighter. She shrugged off his coat, folded it with the same precision she'd given her own coat earlier, and held it out to him. He took it. His hand closed over hers, briefly, just the weight of it, not a grip. "You were the most interesting person in that room," he said. You were the most interesting person in every room he put you in. He was too busy using you to notice. Sloane looked at him. "Good night, Mr. Crestwood," she said. "Good night, Sloane." She got out of the car, walked to her building's entrance, keyed in the code, and let herself in without looking back. Earl was waiting on the kitchen counter, enormous and indignant, already complaining at a volume that suggested he had been betrayed deeply and personally. "I know," she told him. Long story. She fed him, changed into sweatpants, ate cold leftover rice standing at the counter, and didn't look at her phone until she was in bed, at which point she found a message from an unknown number. No greeting. Just Rafferty will send the files Monday at 9 a.m. Ice put the phone face down on the nightstand. Earl settled across her feet with the proprietary certainty of something that has always known exactly where it belongs. Outside, Vancouver went on doing what Vancouver does. Rain and mountains and the dark harbor glittering beneath the bridge, and somewhere in the city's tangled, layered world, a man who had spent 6 weeks building a careful fiction out of her loneliness was discovering what it cost to be wrong about someone. She had not been invisible. She had never been invisible. She had simply been waiting, all this time, in rooms where no one was paying attention.